I feel a bit like a floating head today with all of the knitwear. Just a floating head, bobbing along quite happily. It's not helped by the lack of use of my arms. Oh, this is going to be fun. Hello and welcome to episode 16 of the Knitting Vicariously podcast. My name is Caroline. I am found more commonly across Instagram and Ravelry as Dunderknit. I am a knitter living in London, and if this is your first time joining us here on the podcast, a big hello and welcome to you. A quick word of warning, which is to say that this is a swearing-friendly podcast, and therefore the language around here is wont to get a little colourful. If you're a longer term viewer of the podcast, a massive hello and welcome back. I really hope you're well. Just briefly, following on from the last episode where we spent a bit of time talking about some of the discussions that have been happening around racism and diversity in the yarny community, I just want to make it clear up front that my intention here is to create a safe and welcoming space for everyone, but in particular to makers of colour. If you're not totally sure of the context of some of these discussions and you didn't catch last week's episode, I would highly recommend heading back to episode 15 and checking out the latter stages of that. I will be touching on it this week and going forward, I'm sure, but in terms of a more complete conversation, that is going to be your best starting point. To those of you who did watch, I'm very, very grateful, and similarly to those of you who commented, who reached out with feedback, I really appreciate it. For the most part, overwhelmingly, those comments were very considered, very respectful, and thank you for that. There are a couple of messages that I'm yet to get back to. Apologies. It's taking me a little bit of time to get around to all of the different, kind of inboxes and so on that I have to handle those, but I am working on it. However, I want to make it very, very clear up front that this platform is not going to be tolerant of hate speech or indeed of any willful dismissal of the dialogues that are happening at the moment, and therefore please be aware that if you want to leave a comment along those lines either here or over on Ravelry, there is a very, very high chance that your comment will be moderated, and if instead you would like to make your feelings known, by all means please do hit the thumbs down button immediately below this video over on YouTube as you head out the door. Thank you so much to those of you who are sticking around. I'm delighted to have you here. I really do appreciate it. The eagle-eyed amongst you may have noticed a slight difference this week in the opening credits. I was contacted by a wonderful individual who is Kate Howland and Graphic Dye Works over on Instagram. Kate had reached out and dropped me a note to say that she'd been having a bit of a play around and had come up with some ideas for a new graphic treatment for the Knitting Vicariously. I hesitate to say graphic or logo because what it was before was none of those things. It was genuinely just a kind of opening card that had Knitting Vicariously and Dunderknit written on it, and Kate was so kind to have a bit of a think about how she could perhaps lend her own skills and those of a good friend of hers. So the hand lettering was something that she worked on with her friend Bex Daniels. I'll put both of their details here on the screen so you can give them a follow over on Instagram. They are both incredibly talented individuals, and I'm just really, really grateful to them for doing it. I wasn't expecting it. I'm delighted that they did. This is not something that's been a sort of promotion or anything other than the sense that this is something Kate did out of the kindness of her heart, and I said I wanted to be able to say a thank you to her on the podcast and to use it here. So yes, I'm very, very grateful to you both for doing that. I think they look wonderful. Kate came up with a load of different options, including some that featured gold, which you may be seeing at a later point in the future. But yes, I'm delighted with both of them and genuinely touched that you fabulous individuals decided to use some of your excellent talents to bring a little bit of joy to my day, and now hopefully everyone else is here as well. So thank you both very, very much for doing that. One other quick thing to mention, which happened pretty much in parallel with the previous episode, was to say that I mentioned a couple of times in the run-up to Christmas that I was baffled, humbled, bewildered, and just generally awestruck by the fact that this podcast, Knitting Vicariously, had been nominated in the NIT No Knitter of the Year Awards in the category of Online Innovator. And these are awards that were where the shortlists and nominations were from individuals and members of the public. So in other words, it may well have been you or someone that you know who had recommended this podcast, and for that I am hugely grateful. I am also hugely grateful to everyone who went and voted for this podcast, in spite of frankly some incredible alternatives, and I'm delighted and humbled to say that I'm one of a few winners from that category. So just genuinely thank you from the bottom of my heart. I have been doing this for such a short period of time, and you've already kind of realised that I'm fairly overwhelmed and kind of just taken aback by some of the feedback and the enthusiasm with which I have been welcomed, and I am so appreciative not only of that but also of the fact that yeah, you've taken your time to go and vote for this, so I really appreciate it. In terms of kind of next steps with it, I believe part of the opportunity that comes with winning is the chance to visit the West Yorkshire Spinners Mill later on this spring. Now, I have to do a little bit of just checking around my work schedule. Obviously, as you may well know, I am fairly new in a new job, and it just so happens that in terms of dates, it's pretty close to the Edinburgh Yarn Festival, which I have already booked off because, yeah, not an idiot. Need to make sure, priorities, need to make sure that I can take time off from my brand new job to go and look at yarn and meet with some friends, but I just need to work out my timings around it. I'm really hopeful that I'll get a chance to go, and if I do, I will make sure that I take you along with me for the ride. So yes, I am incredibly grateful. There are a number of other winners in that category as well, not least of whom is my fabulous friend Ellie of the Skein podcast, as well as Helen of Curious Handmade, and I believe Mariana's Lazy Daisy Days, which is a fabulous blog with a number of free resources, as well as Winwick Mum, who also has a wonderful blog too. But essentially, I am sure it was a desperately hard-fought competition, and yeah, I don't really know what to say about it. I'm very grateful. I'm slightly overwhelmed. I'm definitely quite embarrassed. I'm going to move on. But the biggest and most important news in all of this is that our CAL, the Blamed Underknit-along, has finally come to a close, at least for now. Now, this is not to say we're never going to be doing this ever again, but I feel as though accountability on my behalf just needs to be, I can subsume quite a lot of what you're throwing at me in terms of, you know, being accountable for your reckless cast-ons and ignoring all other projects while you work on the things that you're desperate to cast on. But you know, let's do it in small bite-sized chunks, shall we? So I am sure it will be making an appearance again later on this year, but for now, this round of the Blamed Underknit-along is complete, and I am so incredibly happy and grateful, and again just delighted with the enthusiasm with which you've taken this to heart. And between the Instagram hashtags, so the Blamed Underknit-along hashtag, where we had, I think, somewhere close to, I want to say, sort of 2,200 posts with that tag attached to it. And then we had the chatter thread over on Ravelry, which had almost 6,200 posts against it. And this is a CAL that ran from the 15th of November through to the end of January. And just the enthusiasm with which you greeted it makes me so happy. I know there were a number of people who were using it as an excuse to cast on their first colour work, their first sweaters, and I just, yeah, oh, it's fucking brilliant. I love going through that thread and seeing some of your reactions and some of your projects and some of your wishful thinking in a little bit more detail. So thank you so much for that. As we've talked about in previous weeks, there was no absolute requirement for you to finish anything. It was as much about taking part and engaging and chatting along as it was about actually finishing some of the things that you've been working on. But as you may well be aware, there are some prizes that we need to give out. So as we've mentioned in previous weeks, there were a number of different ways that you could use to win a prize. The first of those was to post using the BLAMEDUNDERKNITALONG hashtag on Instagram. The second was to take part in the chatter thread over on Ravelry. And finally, to post in the FO thread also over on Ravelry. The prizes, just as a quick reminder, so each winner will receive a tote bag from Knitting and Gin featuring my fabulous friend Sue Stratford's design, as well as a Knitting and Gin pin badge. So that is one that will match your tote bag there, both from Sue Stratford. And on the subject of pin badges, another fabulous pin badge, this time from Tribe, my local yarn store here in southwest London. A drawstring project bag from the marvellous maker that is Tanny Casey. She is someone I've featured and talked about quite a lot over here, but yes, her drawstring project bags are marvellous. So we've got a selection of those here. You'll be winning one of these. A pair of skeins from Sabrina at Das Mondschaf, and in each of these pairs there is one skein of her Aurora base, which is her single ply, and the other of her mohair silk base, which is her Virgo base, and the colours here are Cersei, which is this beautiful plummy red, you have Tardis, which is this fabulous navy blue, and Kill Bill, which is this amazing mustard yellow colour. You'll also receive digitally a copy of the fabulous Kristin of Volyn Vine's latest pattern, which is her sparkling cider hat, which I knit a few weeks back, but it's knit up using a skein of fingering weight yarn and mohair held together, so potentially a great one for your yarn that you get in there too. And then last but not least, I mentioned these briefly last episode, they are now here and in my hands. There are 3 fabulous progress keepers from the wonderful Hannah, who is the Corner of Craft. These are custom progress keepers designed specifically for Knitting Vicariously because they're gold, and I have to show them to you properly so you can appreciate them. Aren't they stunning? So we've got a little cat on this side, a little waving cat. We have a dragon up here on the top and a unicorn here on the bottom. They're adorable and I love them. And Hannah, you are an absolute marvel. And so yes, all of the prize winners will be receiving one of the different mixtures of items that I've shown on here, but without any further ado, let me tell you who the prize winners are. Now all of these were picked using a random number generator, and the first of those that I'm going to touch on is the prize winner for those using the BLAMEDUNDERKNITALONG hashtag over on Instagram, and the prize winner for that is Killaran Moore. I'm going to put your name on the screen on the off chance that I have butchered it, along with the post that was particularly the one that was the winner. And here you can see that she's got a gorgeous little whip. It is a teddy bear sweater. She is holding, somewhat fortuitously, some mohair together with a fingering weight to make a teddy bear sweater. And yes, congratulations, you are the winner. Next up, we have the winner who was chosen from the chatter thread where, as I mentioned, there were over 6,100 posts to choose from. I'm conscious that some of you were very, very heavily engaged in there, so thank you so much for doing that. The post that was chosen at random was number 1958, and that is Killy Loves Amos, I believe. Again, I'll put it here on the screen for you to see, to check your name. Congratulations, you are the winner from the chatter thread. And then last but definitely not least, we have our winner from the FO thread as well. Again, chosen at random was post number 118, and that is Coco Showers. Coco Showers knit 3 projects. One of those was a fabulous sweater with cables called Lou. The second was a suave hat with some gorgeous colour work. and the last one was the Drift Sweater by Sarah Cook. Massive congratulations to all three of the winners. I am delighted to you for taking part, and even more delighted to be sharing with you some of my very, very favourite items that I've talked about here on the podcast. And so I would ask all three of you to please drop me a message over on Ravelry with the subject line to indicate that you're a winner, so Cal winner for instance, and pass on your details, so your full contact name and address, and I'll get those packaged up and sent out to you as soon as I can. But again, a massive thank you to every single one of you for taking part. It has been an absolute delight, and as I mentioned, it is something I know I want to do again in the future. Indeed, we'll be taking another quick look at some of the last few posts from the Cal from the last couple of weeks, again in our Vicarious knitting section later on this episode. And so there we have it, another couple of very brief things to mention. The first of those, I've already touched on the fact that I'm going to EYF in March, and I'm tremendously excited about that. For any of those of you who are also going, I look forward to seeing you there. My understanding is it's a little bit different from last year, which is the other time that I've been, and that I don't think there's going to be a podcast lounge there specifically this year, but I'm sure that we'll be able to find some time to say hello in passing, and so I look forward to meeting some of you there. I'm also going to be heading to another knitting festival later on this month, and that is Unravel. Unravel is a festival that's taking place from the 22nd to the 24th, I believe, of February, and that is in Farnham in Surrey. It's an event that I've attended for the last few years. I have a few of my very good friends who vend there, and it will be wonderful to go and not only see them, but also some of you as well. Again, I'm not intending to have a formal meetup as part of this. I've no idea how many of you are actually going to be making it, but you are, of course, as I mentioned all the way back in episode 2, more than welcome to stop me and to say hi. I promise there will be hugs and as little awkwardness as either of us can muster. But yes, I think that's us. Let's move into the main section of the podcast then, shall we? So as ever, show notes for this week's episode can be found in the description box here below in YouTube. You find that just by clicking the little down arrow immediately below this video. But you can also find them over on Ravelry. We have the Knitting Vicariously podcast group. You can find that by searching for Knitting Vicariously in the groups tab on Ravelry. And there you will find our podcast group, which includes some locked threads now that were formerly attached to our knit along, but we also have our monthly thread where you can talk about vicarious knits, so patterns or yarns that have caught your eye that you're desperate to work with, even if those are very lofty ambitions that you won't necessarily get to see or do anytime soon. We also have a thread there that is specific to those of you who perhaps have never knitted a garment before and want a little bit of help and advice before casting on your first sweater. And so if that's something you want to have a crack at now that we're in the new year, I highly recommend you do exactly that. But show notes for this week's episode will be there as well. There will be an episode specific thread up there with links to everything that I talk about in this week's episode, as well as some show notes that you'll find over on Instagram. So I have the Knitting Vicariously Instagram account in addition to my personal account, which is Dunderknit, and on Knitting Vicariously there is a new post for every episode where I leave Instagram usernames or hashtags that are relevant to the things we talk about as well. So that makes it just that little bit easier for you to perhaps head on over there and maybe stalk a couple of makers. But without any further ado, let's crack on to the podcast proper. And so first and foremost, and it's been very much the elephant in the room, let me tell you a little bit about what I'm wearing, because I imagine most of you will have realised by now that what I am wearing is my Nil Chicks Swan Chow. Yes, this is Now, this is not the first time this has appeared on my YouTube channel here. Eagle-eyed and Vlogmas-tastic viewers amongst you may well have recognised this from a Vlogmas post that I had. I think it was around about day 18, maybe, where the wonderful Amy of the Stranded podcast, along with Ellie of Skein-Deer, who came over to visit me one evening, we were perhaps a little unfairly, but only a little, talking about the general versatility of this sweater and the fact that it leaves you rather restricted in the arm movement department, and I'll come on to that momentarily. But yes, Amy did try this on and proved and ably demonstrated that it is perhaps a somewhat limiting in its general wearability, if you like. But I'll tell you what, before you judge it too harshly, or before I encourage you to do so, let me stand up and show it off to its full. Do you know what? It's so huge, I kind of need to move back to get it all in the frame. There we go. Let me stand back here. Hi. So this is my Nil Chicks Swan Chow. It is a pattern by Caitlin Hunter. You will probably have seen versions of it here and there. I knit this out of Quince & Co. Lark. I knit it roughly this time last year. Funnily enough, this was my Ravel Annex project for last year. If you don't know what that is, I'll come on to it momentarily. But yes, this is obviously a Swan Chow, and it is incredibly wide round the base. I can't even remember how wide it is in terms of measurement, but if I put my hair out of the way, you will see, so there is a lovely little collar around here. I'm pretty sure it's a tubular cast on around the top, and then colour work the whole way down to, this isn't even my elbow. My elbow is about here. So this is below my elbow where the sleeve separation takes place. It's a little bit lower, I think, than the Tecumseh sweater, which is also a fairly low arm size. And it does mean that any kind of, you know, below elbow movement is fine. There's a little bit of flapping that happens, but anything more than that, more extreme than that, is potentially revelationary, let's call it that. Willful or otherwise. But yeah, it's a little bit indiscreet, shall we say. So you definitely need to be wearing a top underneath it. That's no bones about that. But yeah, it has some concerns, not least because I'm wearing this partly because I'm cycling through sweaters at the moment. Hi, I'll come down and actually talk to you properly. I'm wearing this partly because I'm cycling through sweaters at the moment, and this is one of the last ones I think I haven't already worn here on the podcast, but also because, no bones about it, it's fucking cold here at the moment. Now, I appreciate this is all relative, and it's nowhere near as cold as it is if you happen to be experiencing a polar vortex. My absolute commiserations to you. That sounds like bullshit, and I'm really sorry. Here it's maybe like -5. It's really not that bad, but it's still a little bit chilly, and this is probably one of the thickest garments that I own, being as it is a sort of Aran or worsted weight. Now there is a problem with that though, because in theory it's lovely and warm to a point. It's a bit drafty. I mean, there's a breeze happening. This is one of the weirdest things I've ever done on this podcast, which is stellar. But yeah, I tell you what, let me just scooch round so you can see all of it. There we go. There you have it. It's a bit huge. And then let me sit down and talk to you about it some more properly. Right, hi, I'm back. Sorry about that. So yes, this is the Nil Chicks Swan Chow. I will put a little picture of it up here on the side so you can see how the designer intends to make it look. Now, Caitlin Hunter is, of course, just a fabulous, fabulous designer. She's got a lot of wonderful patterns. I have knit a few of them. I have knit I've finished my Tecumseh, I've finished this, I've finished her cardamom coffee hat twice, I have 2 of those. I cast on her Sunset Highway, not mad about it. I do have a whip version of it though. I also have a whip of her Zweig, which I love and I want to get back to at some point, but it's fingering weight and right now it is fucking cold. So deprioritized that one. But yes, she's got some wonderful, wonderful patterns. Now, my Tecumseh I've talked about here previously. I modified the sleeves so that the arm side started a little higher to make it a little bit more practical, because when it came to wearing a lower arm side, one of the key problems with it is, let me demonstrate. This is not a great look. It's not ideal. Not ideal. And given my Tecumseh was one of the sweaters I took to Rhinebeck, and tote bags and carrying of stuff is very important, modifications had to be made. Now, I made this one beforehand. I made this in February last year, as I mentioned, for the Ravel Annex. Just to touch on that briefly, the Ravel Annex is a Ravelry-wide competition that takes place at the same time as the Olympics. Once upon a time, it may have been called something slightly different that was slightly closer to Olympics and rolled off the tongue a little better, until, I believe, a cease and desist letter was presented on the basis of using names and terminology that was a little bit too close to the actual thing itself, which is, I mean, petty to say the least. But hey, Ravel Annex it now is. And so during that time, and last time it was obviously the Winter Olympics, this time last year, the challenge is you can enter in a number of different events, which is essentially to say knit make-alongs in a number of different categories. So this was a sweater knit-along, and you can enter in teams. I'm not going to go into the absolute infinitesimal detail of it. By all means, pop over to Ravelry and have a look, search for Ravel Annex games, and I'm sure there will be information that comes up. But obviously, I think the next one is going to be next year, around about the time of the Summer Olympics in Tokyo. So prep yourselves well. But yes, I knit this for the Ravel Annex, and do you know what, there's things about it that I really like. Okay, so I love the yarn that I used. This is the first time that I've knit a garment using Lark, which is a Quince & Co yarn, and it's beautiful both to work with and to wear. So Lark is a merino yarn. It is, I believe, a worsted weight, and the colours that I used, so the grey base here that you can see is the Iceland colourway. It is a fabulous slightly heathery light grey, which I love. And then we have, of the colours that I've got here, we have this fabulous mustardy yellow, which is honey, and that is one of my absolute favourites. I love this colour a lot. We have the darker blue here, which is fjord, which is a fabulous kind of, I want to say like a mid-royal, slightly tealy leaning blue, and then the sort of true turquoisey teal colour here is Belize. And all of these I bought from, I think, a German yarn store, a local yarn store. I need to double check exactly where it was, but I have a funny feeling it was mylys.de. I do need to double check that though, so don't count on it just yet. I'll put it on the screen once I've got that confirmed. But yes, so I knit all of this. I knit it in the best part of 2 weeks. It is obviously a fairly sizable sweater, but it's also in worsted weight, and the colour work, it did go quite quickly. I'm also someone who enjoys watching quite a lot of sport on television, and so that definitely helped. But yes, it is, I knit the size small, but I knit it at a larger gauge. I think it's actually designed to be knit in DK weight, and I knit it in worsted on a slightly larger needle size. I will double check. I used a 5mm needle for the body, which is a US size 8, a 4.5 for all of the ribbing, and a 4mm US size 6 for the tubular cast-ons themselves, because I am a glutton for punishment, it would seem. And I did tubular bind-offs and everything all the way around here and on the hem, and ugh. But yes. So yeah, I do really like the yarns that I used for this, but obviously the main thing is just the wearability. Now, if I go outside, I'm going to want to take a bag with me. Obviously, this is not great for shoulder bags. I don't really carry any other different types of bag. Similarly, to go out in this weather at the moment means letting in a bit of a draft, shall we say, and yeah, it's just, I'm not totally sure how wearable this sweater is for me. I love it. I'm just not totally sure how wearable it is, and it's such a shame because I do really love it, and it's lovely and soft and squishy. But yeah, if you want to make one, I'm happy to say that this is probably more of a process knit than it was a project knit, or a product knit rather, in that I really enjoyed knitting it. Just the finished item is not something I'm going to get a huge amount of wear out of, but them's the breaks, as they say. So yeah, definitely a fun garment to knit, just perhaps not the most practical of items, and I don't think that was ever more ably demonstrated than it was by Amy, who tried this on over on my Vlogmas and ascertained that actually wearing it with dungarees kind of helped in terms of the general manoeuvrability. I will leave a link to that episode of Vlogmas in the description box below, and here at the end of the video, because it still makes me chuckle. It is one of my favourites, not least because Amy at various points has a poinsettia that appears to be cropping out from her head. We weren't even drinking. But yes, so Nil Chicks Lunch, I really do like it. It is a fabulous garment to knit, just maybe not the most practical item when it comes to wearing it itself. And so now let's move along into the rest of the knitting content, and wonder of wonders, I have a finished object. Now, it's not blocked because that would be a miracle too far, but I am genuinely delighted to have with me my finished test knit for the fabulous Yelena Dasher. Yelena is our moderator in Knitting Vicariously, the Ravelry group, and this is a pattern. She is a fabulous pattern designer. I have shown a couple of her sweaters in previous episodes, in particular my And She Was sweaters. This is a new hat that I was test knitting for her, and I believe the working name for it at the moment is Candy Dot. I'm not completely sure that that is what she's going to be launching with, but I will of course let you know over here or in the Ravelry forums, and it's fabulous. I'll put a picture of her original Instagram post where she asked for test knitters up here on the side so you can see it. There you can see that she's used a much more fun and vibrant yarn, and there was a pom-pom. Still not decided yet on the pom-pom front. I do quite love it as it is, but we'll see. I'll pop it on in a second. And actually, I've done another bloody good job of matching this, haven't I? I mean, it's a little bit obnoxious with the mustardy yellow, but it's not hella far off actually. So yes, I will pop this on for you and you can take a look and see it in person. Here we have it. It is so deliciously cozy. If I tip my head down, you should hopefully be able to see it. It is marvellous. Now, as I say, I haven't blocked it yet. I'm expecting it to gain a little bit more slouch perhaps once I do, as it is. It's a little bit kind of firm around the crown, but I really love this. I'm blowing out the camera massively now, so apologies for that. But yes, this is knit using two yarns held together, two fingering weight yarns. It is knit using some MCN, so an 80-10-10 blend of fingering weight yarn from Madeline Tosh in the Tidal Basin colourway, and that is held together with some fabulous mohair silk from Amy of the Stranded Dyeworks and Stranded podcast, and that is her merino silk in her Pigeon Fancier colourway. And you can see, I tell you what, let me take it off for a second so I can show you it properly. With the Pigeon Fancier, there are these little kind of spots that you can see. Let me just get the camera to focus. Where the slight variegation, the sort of tonality, if you like, of the mohair silk just creates some really lovely depth to this yarn, the two held together, and I absolutely love it. So you can see again the sort of purpley tones in here, and then a little bit more sort of tealy blue, and it's wonderful. So yes, a couple of very special friends and makers who've come together to help me make this fabulous hat. I will have a project page up for this once Yelena's pattern has been published, but in the meantime, worth knowing, so it took, I would say, just around half a skein of both the mohair silk and of the fingering weight yarn. I will double check my exact amounts and weights, and I will ensure that those are there on the project page. But yes, I really love it. There are a couple of sizes. I knit the larger of the two, and yes, I hope and just really look forward to seeing Yelena's pattern out soon, because I know there are a few of you out there that are very keen to knit it. So I am delighted with this. I'll be blocking this later on today, and yeah, getting it about my head in the not too distant future. Moving along to works in progress now, and I have one that will be familiar to you. It continues to live in my mica bucket, which is, I've actually folded it down for ease of access to my yarn, but is normally a little bit taller than this, because you can already see that my project is overgrowing it slightly. But yes, this is a bag that I was very kindly gifted by one of my fabulous friends, Max, as part of a Christmas present. But in here is my Lakeland pullover. I'll put the designer's picture up here on the screen. This is by Fiona Alice, and it was part of Lane or Lina magazine, issue number 4. But this is my Lakeland pullover, and I am finished with the body. This is a bottom up pullover. You will have seen it in previous weeks. I think last time round I was just about ready to separate for the armholes. I've now done that. You can see it's obviously quite a deep arm side. It's a lovely big kind of slouchy jumper with this fabulous texture here on the front. Yeah, really not easy to show this off with my Swan Chow on. At some point I risk kind of just showing you more of my undergarments than I was prepared to, so apologies for that. I do have a top on underneath. I wouldn't be quite that foolish, but still not ideal. But yes, so I have finished now the front. So we've got this ribbing down here at the bottom, which was the first thing to do. You have a split hem here at the sides and at the back with the delightful little butt flap that I'm going to be blocking a little bit flatter later on. There's also on the back here this kind of center stitch panel that you can see that is a really lovely couple of sort of twisted stitches that run the whole way up it, which again, that will be much more prominent when it comes to blocking. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with how this is going so far. So there was quite a lot of attention that I needed to pay, so it meant that this wasn't quite as fast going as I would have liked, in that I wasn't just zipping around in a circle. I had to pay attention to when I was binding off certain stitches and so on and so forth. I have also now grafted the shoulder seams here. I am by no means an expert at grafting, but yeah, those are now done. And so next is going to be picking up some of the sleeves around, some of the stitches rather, around the armholes and starting to knit those sleeves down, which again, the picking up is going to be a little bit intensive, but from there on out it should be quite simple just to whiz down the sleeves with a bit of stockinette. So yes, that should go well. The yarn that I'm using for this, funnily enough, is the same yarn that I used for my Nil Chicks Swan Chow. So I am using Lark. That is by Quince & Co. It's their worsted base. It is a non-superwash merino and really lovely. I have to say it's a beautiful, soft and kind of squishy yarn to use. But this is the Caspian colour. It's a fabulous kind of oatmeal-y beige that I really love, and perfect for a great kind of throw-on sweater. One thing I will say is this has come out a little bit shorter than I was anticipating. I do think I can block it out and add a little bit extra length. I don't necessarily want to add any extra depth from an armhole perspective, but kind of from here on down I should be able to block it out a little bit longer, even though it's not superwash. This is my thing with bottom-up sweaters, is it's not possible to try them on in the same way as a top-down sweater and figure out exactly where you want them to hit you. So it's kind of difficult to get a steer of kind of, if the bottom of the arm is, if the underarm is here, then kind of roughly this is the measurement that I think I need. If I'm sort of standing and holding a tape measure, it's a bit of a faff. So bottom up, it's not my preference. And I know Amy of the Strand Dye Works podcast was saying the same thing this week. She's just knit the Stonewall pullover by Alicia Plummer, and again just struggling a little bit to kind of sense check some of the measurements when it is bottom up rather than top down. But I reckon I'll be able to get away with this. It should be fine. It's going to need a good blocking anyway, because at the moment it's a little bit a little bit tighter in terms of gauge than it will be once it's blocked, so it'll loosen up nicely. But I have tried it on now that the shoulder seams are grafted together, and it's fine. It just needs a little bit extra length, so I'll make sure to do that later on. And then, as you can see, this lovely neck opening here is where I'm going to pick up and knit the cowl later on. I mentioned previously I'm not totally sure if I want to do it more sort of fitted or if it sits out a little bit, but to be honest, based on the shape of this neckline, I'm imagining it's going to sit out anyway, which is good. So yeah, we will go from there. But I think, I'm trying to think how many skeins I've used so far, or cakes, or yeah, skeins that the Lark comes in. I think I'm on number 7 at the moment, maybe number 8. I'm not totally sure, I'll need to double check, but individual cakes look a little bit like this. So they're each 50 grams and around about 134 yards. And so the yardage on these is reasonable when you take into account the 100 grams. It's not the cheapest yarn in the world, it's also not the most expensive, but one of the real benefits with Lark is that for the most part, as long as you've bought all of your skeins from the same dye lot, you shouldn't need to alternate skeins. And because this is non-superwash wool, it can be spit spliced, and that's to say that rather than worrying about alternating or perhaps doing some helical knitting, which I'm yet to get to grips with, but I'm fascinated by the concept, you can just knit to the end of one ball of yarn, and then just essentially what I tend to do is, this is a 4-ply yarn, so I will twist it and separate out 2 of the plies. I'll break off 2 of the plies just from the last kind of 2 or 3 inches of yarn on one skein or one cake, the one that I'm finishing up. I will then do the same on the new ball of yarn, and then I will be incredibly indelicate. Best not to do this on public transport, tends to get a few looks, but I will lick the palm of my hand or dampen the palm of my hand if you are a little bit of a germaphobe, and then I will take the 2 plies, I will put one in one direction, one from the other direction, lay them kind of roughly on top of each other, and then proceed to rub the 2 of them together. The moisture, the heat and the friction of all of the above tends to felt them together quite nicely, and thus you have your join. And it's just a much quicker and lower hassle way of being able to join your skeins in and around as you go. And as I say, because they're all from the same dye lot, you shouldn't have any problems. If they are from different dye lots, you may experience a different issue, but thankfully I bought all of these at the same time. So yes, I am hopeful that in the next couple of weeks I will have a little bit more progress to share, certainly on the sleeves, if not also the cowl, and we will go from there. I do have one other work in progress that I'm going to share with you this week, and work in progress feels a little bit grand of a title for this, to be honest, because I cast this on yesterday and I haven't got very far with it yet, but nevertheless, this is living in a project bag that I showed a couple of episodes back. It was one that was very kindly made and gifted to me by a fabulous friend of mine from my local knit group, and this was from Margaret, and she is the most wonderful seamstress. And I've mentioned before, our intention is still to try and get her selling her bags online because they are marvellous and we love them all very much. But yes, it is a gorgeous big sweater size drawstring bag, but living in here is a brand new cast on, and this is a pattern that has been in my mind for quite some time. I'm going to show you it. You may not be able to tell what it is yet. Yeah? No? Any guesses? Yeah, it's not the most obvious, but this is actually the fledgling beginnings of a brand new sweater cast on, and I will put it up here on the screen for you to see. It is the Donguri sweater by Sachiko Bergen, and I will put her details up here on the screen along with a picture so you can see what this will look like in eventuality. So this is a gorgeous sweater pattern that has been open in my Ravelry browser for a very long time now. It is a fabulous top-down sweater. Top-down, hurrah! And it has this really beautiful kind of textured yoke. So you've previously seen perhaps that I've knit a sweary pullover. It is a cardigan. I modified that to be a pullover, and the textured yoke is one of the things I like most about it. So that's really what drew me in over here as well. Now the texture here is a little bit different. It is these little, she sort of talks about them as being like acorns, but let me pop it up here. You may well be able to see just a little bit of the texture here starting to appear. So it's really lovely. The yarn I will come on to in a second, but I'm just really enjoying these little textured groupings starting to appear. So yes, the yarn is a Rhinebeck purchase. I am using stash yarn. Look at me go. This here is my Lisa Souza that I brought back from Rhinebeck in October last year. This is her Polworth silk. It's a DK weight yarn. It's in this fabulous green colorway because I got so many lovely comments from people who watched the previous episode, episode 15, and commented on the color of my Julissa sweater. I love that sweater. It is a very similar kind of tealy green, sort of bottly green, tealy green colour, and I absolutely love it. And so when it came to thinking about what colour I wanted to use for the Donguri sweater, this was a very clear choice. And in fact, I've got the remainder of these skeins in here, so let me grab one and show it to you. Here we have it. So this is the Lisa Souza. As I mentioned, it's Polworth silk. It is 85% Polworth wool and 15% silk. It's 400 yards and 4.8 ounces. But yeah, it's a beautiful DK weight yarn, and the colourway name here is Forest. I will be alternating skeins with this going forward. I'm probably going to try helical knitting for the first time. If you haven't heard, my word, it's all the rage at the moment. So I've heard a couple of different podcasters talk about it. I believe one of the first that I clocked talking about it is Grace of the Babbles Travels podcast, or Babbles Travelling Yarns, and I know that she's put together a tutorial video that explains it all marvellously clearly, so I will be using that and attempting to try a little bit of helical or helical knitting, depending on your pronunciation of choice, of my own. So I did want to get a little bit of a way into the yoke initially, just to get up and running with it, and then I will start to alternate as I go. But yeah, this is beautifully soft, very squishy yarn. I've got 4 skeins of it. The other 2 are still in here. I will be taking from that as I go and freeing up some space. It doesn't really look like I've got any extra space, but trust me, there is wiggle room in here where there was no wiggle room before, and therefore I am calling that a win. But yes, I am knitting this on my beloved Chow needles. I use these, as I mentioned repeatedly, for pretty much everything that requires an interchangeable needle. I'm using 4mm needles, which is a US size 6 at the moment, and it is on, I believe this is a 22-inch cord. So yeah, absolutely perfect. In terms of sizing, I'm actually making, now the pattern recommends that you have a little bit of positive ease, but I'm going a bit rogue with this, so I'm actually making one with a tiny bit of negative ease for my bust size. So I am making the size 44. My bust is around about a 45, but the reason for that is I really like the way that my sweary pullover fits me. Again, another textured yoke, another that is sort of quite a fitted sweater up and over the bust, and then I added a few extra increases in so that it is a little bit more A-line, or just not even A-line, just a little bit less fitted around about the stomach and the hips, which is always a bonus as far as I'm concerned. But yes, and I think I like that shape so much. I find it really wearable. It can be worn to work, which for me with knitwear is increasingly a big deal on the basis that I have to go to work quite a lot of the time. And I'd quite like to be able to wear my sweaters when I'm there. So yeah, I'm going to try and knit it a little bit closer fitting than is originally intended in the pattern, but I've got confidence that particularly with the extra silk that's in here and some of the drape that's sort of below the bust, it should flow quite nicely, so I'm looking forward to that. I don't expect that this is going to be done any time soon at the rate that I'm knitting at the moment, but certainly my intention in at least getting this cast on, not to draw too much attention away from my Lakeland, but rather while it is kind of reasonably shallow in its depth, if you like, it's also reasonably portable, and so this can be a little bit more commute knitting now that I've finished my hat. So yes, I will be taking this with me in the mornings and the evenings to and from the day job. So you will be seeing a little bit more of this as time goes on. Moving along into vicarious knitting this week, I have a couple of cheeky purchases that have come my way. I know, you are all shocked, right? But yes, I thought I would take some time to share those with you here. So in the previous episode, I recommended a number of different podcasts. Now, some of those were new to me, some of those were podcasts I've been following along with for a while, but one of the key things that bound all of them together, and many of you spotted it, commented on it, called me out, frankly, quite rightly, on the fact that I didn't explicitly link it to the discussions around racism and diversity that we had later on in the podcast. So yes, I appreciate that. You're right, I should have called that out up front. But one of the makers mentioned in those podcasts was the fabulous Gigi Made It, who has a wonderful Instagram account that I would highly recommend you following. She is incredibly positive. She is very, very just joyful and delightful to watch. And she also showcased a couple of goodies that she had over in her Etsy shop as well. Now, Gigi, for anyone who is perhaps not aware, is a huge fan of the colour orange, and rightly so, because she looks amazing in it, but she has a few pins that also happen to showcase her signature colour and style, and this is one of them. I am delighted to have this little yarn shopper here with her fabulous little orange tote and some skeins of yarn in there too outside of the yarn store. Love it. But of course I couldn't just purchase a pin. That would be a frivolous and, you know, flagrantly wasteful waste of money on shipping. So, you know, I had to get something else as well. And the thing that really did stand out and leapt out at me was this amazing tote bag. Look at it, isn't it fabulous? I love the design of this. So it is a really lovely bag. It's not cotton, it's actually made, I think it's more sort of polyester or nylon, which means it risks being a little bit more weather resistant, which in the UK is never a bad thing. But it also has these fabulous long yellow handles. There were a choice of colours on the handles themselves. It's then got this black lining, as you can see, but it's just a really fabulous and versatile tote. So yeah, really pleased with those, and delighted to be supporting a fabulous maker of colour. On the same day that I picked that up from the post office, there were another couple of parcels waiting for me. This is what happens when you have a day job, is you're not around to collect the parcels as and when they arrive. So you have to offset the fact that, you know, it's prolonged anticipation with the fact that you get a bumper delivery all in one go, which is definitely what I had on this day. So alongside that, I had been lucky enough to, well, speedy enough to nab a few skeins in Kristin of Volyn Vine's update. She had a couple of colourways that she was bringing back, or in one case kind of recreating for the first time, and I definitely have had my eye on those for a while, so I was delighted to be able to nab a couple of those in one of her updates. The colours in particular that I was super excited to try and get my hands on were a colourway that at one point was a one-off. It was a one-of-a-kind. She wasn't sure if she'd be able to recreate it, and then thankfully for all of us she was, because look at it. It's ridiculously beautiful. This is her Paisley colourway, and this skein here is her Smitten DK base, and this is her Ghost Lace. And let me hold them up to the camera so you can appreciate them in their true wondrous glory. There you have it. So yeah, stunning colours. So Kristin's Smitten DK base here on the top is an 80-10-10. It is a superwash merino cashmere nylon, and you get around 231 yards. And her Ghost Lace here is again, it's 72% kid mohair, 28% silk, and that is 459 yards or 420 meters, and they are beautiful. Just there's little pops of orange in there. There's these amazing speckles here on the back. She's a colour wizard, I swear. But of course, again, I had to get a couple of other skeins just to make sure I kept them company. Although with Kristin's updates, it's always risky doing this because you never quite know when you're going to get cartjacked. But there's a colourway of hers that had been calling my name for a very long time. I don't have it, and I'm going to hold it up. I'm going to risk the ridicule of my wonderful friends at my knit group who will accuse this of being brown, but I promise it is far more sophisticated than a pure brown, because this is Kristin's Mooncusser colourway, and again, it is a stunner. There's some beautiful mauvey greys, there's some coppery oranges in there too, and some, I'm going to call them purpley browns, because yes, there are a few browns in there too, and even almost this kind of lavender grey colour in here too. It's just stunningly beautiful. Again, this is on Kristin's Smitten DK base. I was having a bit of a Smitten DK kind of obsession that day, and yeah, this is going to be a hat at some point, but it's such a beautiful colourway. So yeah, a little bit of Smitten DK. And then last but not least, I also grabbed one of Kristin's Christmas colourways, or her holiday colours, which here is Driven Snow. And again, this is one that is beautiful. It is a kind of neutralish, it's a sort of neutralish grey base, but with these fabulous stripes and speckles of quite bright acidy greens and some tealy blues and a few purples in there too, along with some fabulous darker flecks and speckles too, and it's just stunning. So yeah, another on Smitten DK, and yeah, love it. So yes, some absolutely beautiful skeins from Kristin. She is wonderfully talented, and as some of you may know, I've had the chance to meet Kristin and sit and chat with her on a couple of occasions now, and she is a delightful human being, so I'm very, very glad to be supporting her in the yarny sense as well. Kristin was also kind enough to include a couple of extra bits and pieces and goodies for me, and one of the things that I really need to call out, because I laughed really fucking loudly when I saw this. She included some fabulous little stitch markers, which, if this isn't the most appropriate gift for me, or appropriately inappropriate gift for me, I don't know what is. These are fabulous stitch markers by A Needle Runs Through It. She has an Etsy shop that I will link to on the screen here, and let me hold them up so you can appreciate them in all of their sweary glory. Here we have it. So there's one here that says 0 fucks given. There's another, which I want to say cast off motherfucker. I mean, there's just some truly brilliant ones in here. I'm trying to read them all backwards on the camera, which I'm struggling with. But essentially, if I hold them up, you can see some of the ones that are in here. And they are just hysterical. So yeah, these are perfect. Thank you, Kristin. You know me far too well. Yeah, other ones we've got Fuck This Knit. Love that a lot. Rip the motherfucker, that was it. Get your shit together, always. And bitch, please. Oh, these are tremendous. So yeah, had to be just beyond perfect. I will link this below. And the final package that arrived on that same day was actually an order that I had placed in the very, very early part of January. I had spotted that Madeline Tosh on their site were having a sale, and it was a sale of kind of bundles of one of a kind. So these are not colours that actually are aligned to their existing named colourways, but rather batches of yarn that had been dyed close together, which were either identical batches or close enough that they could be sold as a single batch. And so I do have a couple of those. So I have a couple of skeins of their Pashmina base, which is a beautiful sport weight base, which is 75% merino wool, 15% silk and 10% cashmere on this one-of-a-kind orange. And then I have a few skeins as well of this chunky 6 skeins in total in this green colourway, and the Tosh Chunky is 100% merino wool. Now, here's the thing. Anyone who's been around on the podcast for a while will know that I'm a big fan of Madeline Tosh yarns. Now, I have a lot of them, a lot of the sweater quantities that you can see behind me that I talked about at length over on Vlogmas, as well as a lot of the single skeins that you can see behind me here are Madeline Tosh skeins. And that's why it makes it a little bit difficult at the moment, because touching on, again, some of the discussions that we've been having around racism and diversity, there is a bit of a difficult conversation to be had at the moment, not only just in terms of acknowledging white privilege and understanding the various different ways in which I as a white person in the knitting community have experienced a very different set of circumstances and experiences from those of makers of colour, but also because in having this discussion around these incredibly sensitive topics, there are obviously going to be ways in which people respond to this that are going to generate, you know, kind of positive reactions, or potentially ones that are a little bit more problematic. This week we've seen another example of that. So there is a hand dyer that I'm not going to talk about particularly over here because, in all honesty, I don't really want to give her any additional publicity, but she had responded to some of the discussions by publishing a video talking about essentially how she felt victimised in a lot of this, and essentially trying to make a lot of the discussion and the debate about her. And talking about that in my previous episode, that's not something I am comfortable with. I don't feel it's appropriate. I don't feel it's merited in this current debate. This is not about an individual white person in all of this. This is about a broader understanding amongst the whole community of how the experiences felt by one part of the community are very different from those that have been experienced by another part of the community. Acknowledging that and starting to make some real inroads into trying to fix that in the future as best we can. The challenge that I have here is that obviously when it comes to being companies, brands, ultimately organisations that are encouraging people to part with their money and to support them in a financial way, there is a bit of an obligation at the moment on some of those brands to perhaps make their feelings known, to help us understand where they stand, because now that the attention is focused so squarely on how do we ensure that we're doing more, doing a better job of supporting these very, very important causes within the community, there is a little bit of an obligation that comes with that to perhaps have brands make it clear on where they stand. And Madeline Tosh is obviously a brand that I've mentioned I have purchased from over a number of years, but for all that they have come out and talked about the recent discussions and attempted to make it very clear on where they stand, the way in which they've done it makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable. Now, I want to be very clear. I am not encouraging anybody else to go and boycott this yarn company. I am not telling you my thoughts in the hope that we will all jump on this general bandwagon. That's not my intention at all. But as someone who is sitting in front of you with a frankly shit ton of Madeline Tosh yarns in her stash, as well as someone who's just purchased from them, I want to make my own personal convictions very clear that when it comes to using the yarns that I have in my stash, that I will obviously have to continue to do that, and I'm not particularly, you know, I don't denounce them to the extent that I'm going to raise half of my stash to the ground. I don't think that's necessarily the most helpful way of dealing with this at all, but I don't really intend to purchase any more yarn from them in the foreseeable future. And my reasons for that I'm just going to touch on very briefly, and largely that is because I don't necessarily feel they handled the debate in the best possible way. I know that after engaging with the Instagram community around it, and it is Instagram in particular that I'm reflecting on here, they did it in a way that was quite closed, that didn't necessarily inspire or entice dialogue. They closed their comment sections on a few of the posts that they had, and then the key thing for me that I really still am not particularly comfortable with is, to my mind, my personal opinion, is that they used the discussions around racism and diversity. They used the fact that Martin Luther King Day was coming up to coincide and to announce a new yarn line that they came out with, and that yarn line included some key sort of themes and topics from Martin Luther King's speeches that they then used to create colourways off the back of that. And the key thing for me here is I don't necessarily feel comfortable supporting a yarn brand who used the discussions that we were having as an opportunity to create profit for themselves. I think if they'd gone about it a slightly different way, if perhaps proceeds from those yarns had gone to perhaps charities that were aligned with those causes, I would feel very, very differently. But as it is, I personal opinion, I'm not super comfortable with the fact that their main way of responding to the debate was to write a kind of very long and arguably quite heartfelt blog post about the way that they felt some of the themes and topics were kind of relevant to them and how they'd incorporated that into the yarn, but ultimately that yarn was then being sold and profits were coming their way off the back of it. So yeah, I'm not really okay with that. Now, there's some other stuff that's going on in the background. There's been a lot of talk over on the Ravelry forums, the Madeline Tosh Shop Stalkers forum, which is one I've been a member of for a while, just around customer service and a few people that have struggled to get orders or any responses from the organisation. At the moment, as I say, for a multitude of reasons, I'm not super comfortable investing any more money with them going forward. That being said, I have a considerable amount of Madeline Tosh in my stash, and I will be continuing to work with that because I'm not going to cut off my nose to spite my face, so to speak. I consider all of this to be a sunk cost behind me, and yes, I don't really need any additional comments about how sunk a cost that is. I appreciate it, but at the same time I just want to make sure that going forward, when it comes to making new purchases from here on out, that I am being a little bit more conscientious and aware of where I choose to spend my money. And so I'm still having a think about how best I manage that going forward, and if there are projects that I'm working with where the yarn is perhaps from a dyer that I'm not entirely comfortable with promoting, which is effectively what I'm doing here on the podcast, I just need to have a bit of a think as to how I want to manage that going forward. And yeah, we will go from there, but I wanted to have a little bit of a chance to talk through why perhaps I'm not going to be purchasing too much from there in the short-term future at least. So that's all my vicarious knitting this week. We do have a new thread that's open over on Ravelry, which is a space for you to go in and share your vicarious knitting, whether it be brand new patterns, whether it be things that have recently come to your attention, whether it be projects that you're lusting over or yarns that you just can't wait to cast on. Feel free to share your ideas over there, and we will enjoy them together. But now that the Blamed Underknit Along has come to a close, I do want to take this last opportunity to reflect on some of your fabulous projects that you worked on as part of the Blamed Underknit Along. So I'm going to take a few posts from Instagram this time round to round out the Blamed Underknit Along, and therefore, for the last time in at least the foreseeable future, please do take the time to enjoy our calorie. really going to miss looking at these going forward. It's such a joy just to keep the hashtags alive in my Instagram feed and to drop in on the chatter and the FO threads as they were over on Ravelry. So yes, I'm going to miss those. But that being said, I still obviously want to, as I did prior to the Cal kicking off, I still want to use a little bit of time each episode just to shine a light on some of the Vicarious projects that you have underway, whether those be entirely wishful thinking or whether they be things that you are working on. And so please do continue to use the Knitting Vicariously hashtag. So rather than the BLAMEDUNDERKNITALONG hashtag, back to the podcast hashtag Knitting Vicariously on Instagram. If you see projects or patterns that are launched, or if you see yarn that you're just desperate to work with, please do feel free to repost those or to post your own images, and I will take a look through and perhaps include some of those here. Likewise, I'll be keeping an eye on the monthly Vicarious knitting threads, and any patterns or anything that I think is particularly exciting that I really want to share over here, I will make sure I do that as well. And that's it for this episode. So certainly, again, my work is still a little bit full on. I'm still struggling to get quite as much knitting done as I would like to. And I'm still very conscious that this takes up a day at a time. So it's still going to be another couple of weeks, and possibly for at least the short term, it's going to be every other week as far as the podcast goes. But I should be fitting in one more episode ahead of Unravel and at least a few more before EYF later on this spring. And so yes, I look forward to catching up with you next time. As I mentioned, show notes can be found in the description box below over on Ravelry in the Knitting Vicariously podcast group, which you can find by searching for us in the groups tab. You will also be able to find show notes over on Instagram by following Knitting Vicariously. That is an account that is separate from my own, which is dunderknit. To all of you who took part in our knit along, thank you so much for doing that. It's brought me so much joy. I hope it's done the same for you. And to the 3 prize winners in particular, please do remember to drop me a note with your contact details, and I will get those prizes out to you shortly. But everything else being well, I wish you a wonderful rest of day, rest of week. I hope your knitting keeps you happy and fulfilled, and if for whatever reason it doesn't, I hope you have the opportunity to knit vicariously. Keep on keeping on, and I will see you again next time. Bye. So if you are over on Instagram, you will have spotted that there are a couple of challenges doing the rounds at the moment. So the way challenges work on Instagram is someone will post a little list that looks like this, where there are daily prompts, and the idea is throughout that month, every day you post a picture that is relevant to the prompt, and you share it with a hashtag. Now, the problem with that is I am not that fucking organised. I'm really not. I struggle with the daily prompts in particular. So what I thought I'd do is a bit of a cheat, and I'm going to whack a few of them in here. So everyone's a winner, right? Well, mostly me. You're not really winners, but let's go with it. So the name of the challenge that I'm looking at here, and I'm going to mangle it because when it's written down is one thing, when you have to say it aloud, challenging. Vicariously? Let's go with that. Vicariously challenge. I like it. I see what you did there. And this is a challenge that is started and promoted by Creative Ceci, who is a fabulous maker over on Instagram. I will put her handle here on the screen for you to check her out. But yeah, I'm going to rattle through a few of these. So prompt number 1. Hi, my name is Caroline. I feel like if we've got this far in the podcast and you didn't already know that, there are bigger issues at stake, but let's move on. Number 2, when I'm not knitting, I'm usually at work, probably on a conference call, probably wishing I wasn't on a conference call or at work. Or I have been sitting under my cat quite a lot at the moment, so the lovely and poor little Hobbsy, he had a dental appointment at the vet and had to have 3 teeth taken out, and I was very sad and quite emotional. So yes, I've been doing a little bit of fussing over him recently as well, so I'm either at work on a conference call or I'm sitting underneath my cat. 3. My first project. My first project was a ribbed iPhone sock. and it was knit out of yarn that was almost too fine to be fingering weight on tiny needles. So to say it was ambitious is something of an understatement. I mean, it looked alright. I used it for a bit and everything. I think it is on my Ravelry page if you really want to take a look at it. But yeah, that's the very first thing that I actually knit outside of little practice swatches. So there you go. Number 4, my current project. I feel like we've established this. Moving on. Number 5, one podcast I love. One podcast? You're making me narrow it down to one podcast? Dick move. I mean, knitting podcasts, I can't narrow it down. You'll have to have a look at my subscriptions on YouTube because I've got too many to talk about. But if I'm going to talk about a knitting podcast, if I'm going to talk about a non-knitting podcast, one that I've been listening to a lot, and I'm not talking about ologies because I've mentioned that before and I talk about it far too much, but one that I've been listening to a lot recently is a podcast called the Horn Section Podcast, and that's Horn, H-O-R-N-E. The Horn Section are a comedy group led by one guy in particular who is Alex Horn here in the UK. He has a band that together they write and perform comedy songs. They have a guest on each week. It's very funny. I've been listening to that quite a lot on my commute and occasionally bursting out into fits of laughter, which on the London Underground is a bit questionable. So yeah, one podcast. Number 6, this is my fibre family, and this is where I think a visual aid has to be used because I'm lucky enough to say that I have a few of these. So aside from you wonderful folks who make doing this podcast just an absolute joy, there are a few others that I've been lucky enough to be part of over the years. The first of those to mention is my local knit group. They're a wonderful group of women. I don't get to see them as much as I would like, and in fact I think in terms of kind of getting us all together again, it's always going to be a challenge, but certainly to my wonderful, wonderful friends that are out in Buckinghamshire, I love you all dearly. I don't get to see you quite as much as I would like, particularly now that I've moved back to London, but you are always in my heart, so big love to you. And also to my fabulous group of knitters that I know from Ravelry for the last few years. You know who all of you are, and I was delighted to get to meet a fair few of you at Rhinebeck in person after speaking to you for a number of years. And for those of you who haven't seen our rainbow, I will pop it in here, but yeah, big love to all of you, and to those of you who weren't there but wanted to be there, you were there in spirit, and I love you all very much. Number 7, throwback project. I mean, I feel like we do that every week with the things that I'm wearing, so everything I've ever worn in the podcast. Moving on. Number 8, knit or crochet? Knit. Crochet? I'm cat-handed and not very good at it. I have my blanket, that's about it, so predominantly knit. Number 9, 9th on my Ravelry queue. Oh Christ, who knows? Give me a minute. I mean, the thing with this is you're making the assumption that I actually used the Ravelry queue as a means of actually choosing my projects. Currently number 9 on my Ravelry queue is a hat called the Bristol hat by Amy Christoffers. I will put it in here so you can see it. I don't really conform to the queue. I'm more impulsive and just a bit too spontaneous and short-sighted for that. So yeah, there we go. 10, coffee or tea? Both? Why are you making me choose? That's just rude. Both. Not at the same time, but both. 11, fingering or bulky or question mark? For me, anything in the kind of fingering to heavy DK light worsted ballpark. I don't really knit too often with things that are heavier than that, and if I do, they don't tend to get worn quite so much. They tend to be quite heavy. This worsted here is probably about as heavy as I prefer to go, so there you go. 12, favourite colour? All of them? As long as it's a dual tone, I like it. Special, obviously, place in my heart for gold. Love me some gold. Gold. 13, knitfluencer I love, and bonus points for the made up word that is knitfluencer. Again, too many to mention. Crumbs. I'm really going to struggle to choose one person. I think if I have to, I'm going to go for Creative Ceci herself, partly for setting up this challenge in the first instance, and partly because in recent weeks and the dialogues that have been happening around racism in the community, she has been a real kind of ray of compassion, but also someone who is willing and incredibly passionate about diversity and inclusion. It's something she does as part of a day job, and it's something that she shouldn't have to spend her time educating those of us who are white or perhaps just not entirely aware of our privilege, but has been doing a sterling job of exactly that. So yeah, knitfluencer, there we go, that I love. At the moment it's Creative Ceci, so thank you so much for that. And then the last one that I'm going to do today is number 14, and that is love. And that feels like an appropriate and not entirely thought out way to finish with this week's podcast, which is to say thank you all so much for being here, for those of you who stuck it through, and for those of you who are committed and determined to making real changes both in yourself and in the yarny community at hand. I have a huge amount of love for you all, and I look forward to catching up with you again very soon. Bye.